Hello and welcome to Food Truths. I'm Eric Schulze here on the Spoon Network. We're going to be talking about how food affects our daily lives from people who know it the best. Today, my guest is Larissa Zimberoff, a fantastic food journalist who has been covering emerging food trends for well over a decade. Her pieces focus on the skeptical nature that she has, yet optimistic about food itself, and has appeared in publications like the SF Chronicle, The Atlantic, Fast Company, Bloomberg. And she writes routinely about emerging technologies in the space as well as emerging trends, most notably and recently the ultra processed food trend as well. Larissa has a fantastic opinion about most aspects of food production, and I hope you enjoy the discussion we have together. She's such a fascinating human, and we could have gone on forever. So please, if you'd like to contact Larissa, information's in the show notes. But for now, please enjoy the conversation that I have with Larissa Zimberoff here on Food Truths. Well, welcome, Larissa. It's always a pleasure to see you and your smiley face and your sharp brain. So thanks for being on Food Truths.
Thanks for having me on here, Eric. Your sharp brain impressed me when I first interviewed you at Upside Foods, and it's great to see you in a new roles and playing out in the food world in so many different ways. And still loved having you in my book, Technically Food, and crossing paths in my journalism that I work on day to day.
Yeah. Well, I get to turn the tides a little bit and ask you some questions. For those listening, my father's a journalist, so although I'm a scientist, I grew up being around journalism and really fascinated with the fourth estate and just this idea of understanding what base reality is. I think journalism and science have a lot in common in that sense. And
As,
yeah, go ahead.
asking hard questions, constantly researching. I am not a scientist, but I love to learn new things every week, and it's almost like always being in school.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, and we're going to talk about this, is you such a unique insight, I think, into like food technology, but also just like where trends are going, like why people are choosing to build companies or products in the way that they're going, and you have your ear to the ground on a lot of food trends and where things are going. So very curious to unpack some of that. Um, I do want to start with this notion of, I believe that like a really good tell of a good business is whether a smart journalist like yourself can figure out like what the business plan is once you know the technology, like where it can be. Like it's that obvious. So I'm curious, because you focus on in part food technologies and where things are going, like what types of information are you looking for when you hear about new trends, new technologies, what have you, that tells you this new thing in food might work, or maybe it's doomed?
I look at everything, right? How much was invested so far, what their name is, what they're doing. So, like, one kind of murky area has been people who are growing protein in plants, which is like, okay, can I describe this to other people? Will other people understand what they're doing? What is even their name? Like, there's an Israeli company that's growing proteins in potatoes, and it's like their name is Polopo, right? And I'm like, oh, that name. Like, can I explain it? What is even their website look like? What can I understand what they're doing from their website? And a lot of times, Eric, I can't. You go to the website and you try to figure out what they're doing and you can't break it down. And when that happens, I kind of put my brakes on and I think about it a little harder. If I ask questions and they don't get back to me, that's definitely something that I register, and that happens a lot. Something as simple as like, what are the ingredients, right? And I don't get a reply. Um, if they can't answer my questions, if they think I'm asking hard questions, if I can't understand what they're doing by looking at their website, if there's too much marketing language in their pitch, those are all sort of warning signs for me. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I think you're the first person that, this is why I love talking to you, that would say like the name itself of the company tells you a lot. Most people, like, it's I'll be honest, like you put probably 30 minutes into thinking about the name. If you're just starting, you just need something as a placeholder. Um, but even more interesting too is like the getting back to you part. Because a lot of, I mean, playing devil's advocate for a second, a lot of startups will just be like, I don't have time for this. I just need to like bang out my minimum viable product, and that's what's important to me. Do you think
Well,
that
I
like
just I
folks?
just I just sorry. I'm just so excited to talk about this topic. I just got a pitch from a founder about their raise. Now, the raise was 15 million, which in today's world, right, where investment is really hard to come by, 15 million is
That's
a
knocking
ton,
out of the
a
park.
lot,
That's a home run.
right?
That's a home
Right, a
run.
home run. But in Upside Foods days, it was like it's nothing. It's like, here's a check for, $100. And he sent me this pitch. The embargo was the next day, which always annoys me because I'm like, why is this an embargo for tomorrow? And then I asked him a few questions. Do you have videos of the production process? What is it made of? And I'm still waiting to hear back.
Hmm. So, like, what do you think that says? I guess is it like they're not ready? Is it they wouldn't know how to answer? Like, what? I guess around this, is this different than like a PepsiCo or a Coca Cola? How they would handle it? Sort of these larger
Oh, they don't get back to
CPGs.
me too.
Okay,
I-
okay, there we go. So then why don't they get back to you? Like what I guess what's the common thread here?
Yeah. So with a new company like this founder that emailed me, it's probably because he doesn't have PR yet and just doesn't understand how it works and didn't have
Mhm.
enough time to get back to me. So, and my questions were hard. I mean, not truly hard. Do you have video of the production process so I can see it? That's not hard, but maybe he's like, shoot, I don't know what to do here. And what are the ingredients? Oh shoot, I don't know what to tell her. I might have asked, I have asked those same questions to PR people who will take a very long time getting back to me. When they do get back to me, they'll say, oh, it's taken me time because of the client, blah, blah, blah. So I think many companies try to get PR before they're ready. And so I think that's a problem. I tend to wait a long time before I write about companies. I usually ask how close they are to commercialization and use that as my barometer for, how far along they are and whether or not this is actually something that's going to come to fruition.
Right. Well, uh, you are a famously skeptical journalist, and I mean that in the most positive way, like that you can be. I think that
I should
the
change my
level
book
of
title instead of technically food, skeptically food. Actually,
hey,
let me write that down. That might be my next book.
write that down. That's the sequel, or the updated version. Um, but to me, you're very famously skeptical journalist. As someone who had work in worked in the private sector and has worked for the government, like I'm used to talking to journalists, and of course with my father and like being around it. So like I tend to gravitate towards journalists that are skeptical because I find that those are the most interesting questions. They tend to want there. Tend to want to understand. It's not coming from a place of I don't automatically disbelieve you. It's more of like I want to know. So but I want to say that you're skeptical, but you write optimistically about the future of food technology. And so, where did this approach come from? Like, you have this very well honed critical eye, but also pragmatically optimistic, I might say. Well, how did you figure this out? I don't know, see anyone else doing this.
Well, first, thank you for noticing that and enjoying it and liking it and appreciating that because I'm not always appreciated for that sort of skepticism. I In my book, I write that I have type 1 diabetes, which I've had since I was 12. So I'm going on 4 decades with this, condition that is very difficult. The only way for me to eat is to take insulin, and processed, ultra processed food is harder for me to deal with than just whole foods with fiber and protein and fat, carbohydrates. So that I look at everything through that lens, and that I can't turn it off, right? And so I think that that makes me just an exceptional journalist when it comes to food because I can't turn this lens off, which is what the hell is this and what is it going to do to my blood sugar? And I think about that first. So my optimism comes from I want, chronic conditions are on the rise. Over, 50, 60% of Americans have at least one chronic condition. Diabetes is certainly a chronic condition. And I want us to be doing better for our food system and for
Mm.
people. I want the FDA to be helping people thrive. So if they're supposed to ensure that our food is healthy, not healthy, ensure that our food is safe, I think it should be that they ensure that our food is good for us. So I am optimistic because there's such excitement into food and the startup world of food and food tech. And I want them to somehow fix all the problems that I see.
And you think that, and then
All
what's your role?
156 problems.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting because again, when I uh, was working in the cultivated space with Upside and other, early on, I think part of a lot of the frustration I had was working with NGOs and people that had good intentions, but maybe like had been beating the same drum about like the food system and their pet issues, the things that needed to improve for like 30, 40 years. They've been raising money off of it. And I would say like, this is clearly not working. Like, why don't you go work for the government itself and go change it? And Do you feel like outside of just going and like directly working for someone like an FDA, do you think journalism's like the next best thing, or do you think like private industry tends to have like the innovation approaches tend to shift things, the outcomes towards what you want sooner? Um, or do you think that it's just a combination of a lot of different factors?
I think we need to be pressing on every spoke
Mm.
to fix our food system, and that's innovation, startup culture, it's journalism, it's academics and scientists. Right now, ultra processed food is what's getting all the attention, which I love. But then there's like, kind of silly confusion. Like a recent New Yorker article about ultra processed food had a expert saying, well, kidney beans might be ultra processed in this example. And I'm like, kidney beans, okay, only if those kidney beans are in, a lean cuisine or some kind of, packaged food, not on their own. So we need everything to be working on it. Right now, I'm really nervous about the government and about where it's going and what may happen. I think some people are, hopeful that Kennedy will bring some change, at least to the school system. But I'm kind of nervous about what government is going to do with food. I had always hoped that government would take a bigger part in fixing the system. You know, One idea I have is that big food companies are only allowed to have, I don't know, 15% of their assortment be ultra processed, and then everything else has to help us thrive, not make us, give us chronic conditions. So we need a lot of people working on this one issue, food system as one topic, even though it's so big, but food being worked on by all the different spokes that could possibly touch it.
That's so interesting. Okay, I want to touch on two things from that. Um, One, I asked this of another guest, but I want to hear your perspective. How would you, in the describing what ultra processed, like a plain language definition that you think most people listening might, because we say it, but I don't know if people really know what that means, um, and the degrees of processing down, because like beans are processed, but very minimally, right? Generally. And then second, I'm curious where you got, that's an interesting, it's like a climate or carbon tax, like 15% with these CPGs. Where where did that number come from, if you have sort of an estimate in your head? And like, because I think that's a really interesting take.
Yeah. So, an easy definition for ultra processed. But first, anybody listening should go read up on ultra processed. It's in my book. It's online in many places about sort of these four um, categories of food and how they turn into ultra processed. And ultra processed means I can't make it at home. There are ingredients that I don't know, and it's for me, it's like steps of processing. So like let's talk about a single ingredient that's in a lot of foods. It's soy protein isolate or pea protein isolate. Well, that pea is grown. It's a yellow field pea that's grown in the field, and then it's fractionated to remove the protein from the carbohydrate and the fiber, and that protein is then turned into either an isolate, which is the highest concentration, or a concentrate, lower concentration, maybe a different texture, or it's just soy protein, right? Soy protein concentrate, so soy protein isolate. And that yellow field pea is grown, it's picked, It's processed, it's sent somewhere else to be fractionated, it's refined and maybe refined again, and then it goes to a company to formulate into a food. That's ultra processing. And you can tell that, soy protein isolate, 3 words to describe one thing. So I don't know. That's an easy way for me to say that something is ultra processed.
And then for that 15% cap, where
Yeah.
do you derive that from?
Yeah. I mean, that's the LZ, Larissa, back of pocket. Like, I'm not going to let them do 25% because to me, that's too much.
Oh,
So
I
15%.
thought you published already. This is a published peer-reviewed article that you'd released, and I was gonna be able to tell people, "Go read the."
It's in
Not that
it's in
not that
nature.
that's
It's in
negative,
nature. Yeah, I did a test with the NIH. I did a big long 2-week study with
but
the
that's interesting.
NIH. We fed people like 15% ultra processed food and it came out okay. To me, it's like, a lot of people reference the 80/20, right? 80% of
Mm.
the time you eat right, 20% of the time you live your life. And I think that I'm tightening that up just a little bit. So,
So it's like a stretch goal that you would say in the startup world.
exactly.
It's like, "Okay, let's set it where we think it's gonna be pretty hard to get there, but not impossible, so
Mhm.
that even if we come short, we're still doing very well."
Exactly.
Or
Exactly.
as I
I
used to tell
want
my teams, what is it?
Yeah.
"Shoot for Mars, but it's okay if we land on the moon."
Yeah, yeah. 15% is like, yeah, stretch goal. Like if they get, gosh, if we could even get them down to 40 or 35, like just like make it easier for us to walk the earth and thrive, right?
What's
Versus, yeah.
what is the current percentage then of food products that contain or are ultra processed? Do you know?
Ooh.
Or at least a rough
Yes,
I don't know off the top of my head.
it's probably like 2/3 of the food in our supermarket is ultra processed. I
Or
know that
contains an ultra processed
yeah, it's like
ingredient.
60 to 70, it's like 60, over 60% of our food is ultra processed.
That's super interesting, and I also like, what is it, 85% to 90%, depending on how you contain a genetically engineered, ingredient of some sort in a grocery store. Um,
Oh, gosh, I don't know that. I mean, it's corn, it's,
it's corn, soy, and yeah,
soy.
corn, soy, and wheat. And but there is some overlap. Obviously, you know that I'm a genetic engineer. I believe that genetic engineering is it can and typically is used responsibly. It's what you do with the product you produce from it. Like, for example, you're going to use corn, you're going to highly process it into something that can be used then in a food product. How many things are made from starch, for example,
Oh,
or
yeah,
corn,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I
or
was just
soy?
reading about honey that comes from honeybees fed on high fructose corn syrup, and that honey is less nutritious. I was like, "Oh gosh, I hadn't thought about this one yet." And it's like, "Oh,
Well, that
no."
well that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah, it makes
I mean,
sense,
well,
but do
this
we know, like, now I have to know what to l I mean, generally, I buy local honey from the farmer's market. If you're listening, that's where you do. Buy it from the local farmer's market, you meet the beekeeper. But most people don't do that. They buy the cute little bear in the supermarket. So what do you look for to figure out that the bees were fed high fructose corn syrup? Because the
mm,
the container is just gonna say honey.
contains honey. Larissa, what for someone who maybe can't afford or get to a farmer's market, what's the next best grocery store honey option? Like, I feel like that's something people always want to know.
Yeah, it would be, raw or unrefined or unfiltered honey. So look for something dark and, the least shiny and packaged as possible.
Mm.
Something in a glass jar also, because I also have a thing against plastic.
Well, I m- extending this a bit, we've had conversations many times in the past about where the current food production system is, specifically in regards to the use of animals as a core source of protein. You've written about this ad nauseum, and I think that's partially what you're really well known for. It's patently obvious, I think, to both of us empirically that we're burning through our resources to supply, and grow an increasing amount of plants that feed livestock, and of course the land that we need to feed to grow those animals, and increasing more land and water, of course, to grow those animals too. Um, but we know consumers are purchasing more and more meat. There's no intention of reducing their intake. Uh, we know consumers don't really like to, myself included, don't like to change my behaviors, and then we know it's going to impact climate, but that's not enough to change purchasing behavior. So I wanted to ask you to sort of explore the space on like what it's going to take for consumers to switch over to, say, an alternative protein, whether it be plants, cultivated, precision fermentation, myco. Like, I'm just really curious what you think from what you've seen is going to take, us to actually switch over, and maybe approximately how long.
Well, switching over isn't necessarily the question. It's how many people can we get? How long will it take to get people to bring them into their house so that it's a part of their diet? And I might compare it to plant based milks, which has taken decades to get to where it is today, which is that it's normal in the grocery store and people have it in their fridge. But alongside that container in the fridge is probably still cow's milk. So, but it has incredible volume and sales, and, we believe in it, and yeah, I see you raising your hand. You wanna jump in?
No, 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 please, please.
I think for alternative proteins, as when we're talking about something that might stand in for animal protein, so, analogs to chicken, beef, etcetera. It's going to take we already have, things are already normalized. Tofu, we've got soy protein products, soy protein bacon from Morningstar. You know, it is something that people understand and are bringing into their house just in very small amounts. I think it's going to take another generation, so Gen Z or Gen Alpha, to really see a change in the percentage of what is bought. We're still going to see people buying animal meat, but can we get them to start also buying these alternative analogs? And alternatively, for the alternative protein space, to see traction quicker, it would be that we have calamity. So, and I don't see
Mm.
that far off. Drought, fire, famine, war. How many wars are going on right now? Pandemic, right? We're looking at bird flu right now. So that will drive it really fast. And alternatively, we're just going to have to wait for the next generations.
Um, so do you think it's sort of a switching of the guard effectively? Like, why do you think the new generations would embrace it more? I mean, some of the research I've seen, yes, I think that's true. Zoomers, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha are more open to these new, other types of protein and are much more climate focused. But I'm just curious if there's anything else you think is driving that will drive that.
Yeah, I mean, they're more sustainable. They're more interested in what is sustainability. They are thinking and talking about the climate. Also, they're growing up with a Tetra Pak of plant-based milk, and they may not know that it was ever delivered to your door, or that it was ever came in glass, or that it was ever coming from a cow, right? They won't. They're going to grow up not even knowing that, perhaps. So like, getting my parents to do something is almost impossible, but then talking to, like, my niece or nephew who are Gen Z, or talking to another generation, they're like, it's like comparing peanuts in my generation where it was, served on the plains, to peanuts now. Like, we're gonna see that shift.
Right. And is it one thing I struggle with is this notion that the is it that we have enough products to convince people that they're valuable and we'll buy them, or like that we have enough entrenched interests in sort of like incumbents, like the conventional meat industry. Again, they don't have to even market their products; the product sells itself. Um, what and again, it doesn't have to be a binary outcome, but I'm always thinking about like what is it going to take. Does it just mean like flooding the zone with new products is like to give people options, or and then maybe one stands out? I guess why has it not gone past 8.5 people out of every 10 on the planet just sort of not eating meat? Like I feel like we're it has increased over time, but we're still at 1.5 people for every out of every 10 voluntarily don't eat meat, or culturally for whatever reason.
I think getting over our cultural, you know, up like how we were brought up, what we were eating, what we eat at, holidays and traditions, like we people don't aren't used to like on the one hand, foodies want these like new crazy things, right? Like the when the cronut came out or when like, exciting like things to get in line for. Like that's like a whole different category. But this is like asking people to like, change their day to day. And so people want convenient, they want cheap, and they want delicious. And I don't know that we've quite gotten there yet. I'm okay eating bacon that's not from a pig, that's, a plant-based or myco-based bacon that is like pretty good, right? I don't need it to be fantastic. Um, but most people want it to be one for one, So there's a gluten-free flour called Cup for Cup, and it's fantastic, but it was worked on for years with a chef and, his R&D chef, and then they didn't come out with it until it was like firing on all cylinders to make a perfect product, and we don't quite have those perfect products, and people have higher expectations from their food. They want them to be like, the same or as what they remember, and now unfortunately, we have this whole dialogue about ultra processed food, which I'm so happy to see and hear and read. But now people are looking kind of askance at these alternative proteins and just being like, well, isn't that ultra processed?
By the way, not just any chef developed Cup for Cup. Michelin starred chef Thomas Keller, who kind of secretly just launched this very, very good brand of gluten free, which I use exclusively because and also I think the other brand, King Arthur, makes a very good gluten free flour too that functions very, very generically well. Um, but you're right. I think there's it's going to take a lot of different options to get people to actually invoke, and I think being able to having access to them is also very important. And right now most of these products are more expensive than their conventional counterparts depending on what you're purchasing. I think the best example of where it's working is, again, plant-based milks like you brought up. I think they've gotten to the point where they're fairly competitive with dairy, and the only thing that they haven't really been able to crack is sort of processed dairy, like cheese, for example. Like cheeses are hard to do with plant based, and
I,
still
I
like
think
really win.
cheeses will be the next thing. Not to jump in, but I think cheese is where we're gonna see some new food tech, like, make some leaps, and I might point to New Culture, which is making
Mm.
mozzarella that they're, precision fermentation-based mozzarella that Nancy Silverton is using at her pizza place in Los Angeles, and she loves it, right? I mean, she talked about the differences, but she also loves it, and she's using it. So, as a company like that, kind of the first of its kind, as to get there, right? To get to actually manufacturing cheese and supplying it to, okay, still one pizza shop. So, it just shows you how long it's going to take, right? New Culture is in my book. My book came out in
Mm.
2021. I researched it in 2019 and 2020, wrote the book in 2020, through the pandemic. And they're just there, and it's 5, 6 years probably that the company's been around, and they're supplying to one pizza place. So it's really going to take time, not just for consumers to accept it, but for the company to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, it took me and my team um, like 6 years to really build out the first cultivated meat product here in the U.S. Like I designed that product, I mean, pretty early on in my tenure, and then really it was like optimizing, and then of course, as you know, because you've written about it, the regulatory process as well.
Well, wait, let's
Quite long.
let's just stop there a second because like you played basketball, you are a scientist, a biologist. Why food?
The simple answer is because to me, growing up in a Southern household, food is like at the center of everything, and it is. My mother was a cake baker, so
Oh, I
and
didn't
she
know
did this,
that.
and so my mom is an artist, and she would express that through her art, through cake decorating, and she ran a small business for years, and I was fascinated with the process of baking. So I cooked with her, and I found it to be really fascinating. Um, I didn't really realize it then, but it was because it's science. It's science where you get to eat the results. And then I realized I went to undergrad in New Orleans, and I to play basketball, college basketball. Grew up in Texas, went to New Orleans, Louisiana, and the food culture there. If I thought Texas had a good, broad, varied food culture, New Orleans just blew it out of the water, and I just fell in love
100%,
with.
100%. Yeah.
I mean, if you've ever been, if anyone's listening's ever been, you know that most places you you eat to live, uh, but in New Orleans you live to eat. And it was such a transformative experience to me that to this day I still do like New Orleans and Cajun Creole preservation cooking, like dinner parties and stuff like that, because I think it's so important. So I don't know. I think it's the most practical and pragmatic application of science that you can do that benefits everyone. You get to see it. So I don't know. That's what's always kept me involved.
That's
Um,
great. One of these days, I'm gonna get to come to one of your smoked barbecue, big
oh
backyard
yeah,
parties.
that's true. That's true. I consider myself a reducitarian, as we've talked about, and that is something I didn't even know existed until I worked in the cultivated meat space. But I know that I cannot give up meat. I know that that's not something I'll ever give up.
Mhm.
So, so I'm very motivated to solve it, to replace it with something that I would feel comfortable eating that is just as good, if not better.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
thanks.
trying. Um, but like designing a product, and to your original point, is the food system is it's so enormous. People don't even it's you can't even imagine, and like most people can't imagine how large the volumes have to be able to compete on as a commodity product in the United
Yeah.
States or
Yeah.
globally.
Mhm.
It's unfathomably large. Like
Mhm.
1 million pounds a week is nothing in the meat industry.
Mhm.
Producing a
Mhm.
million, so people don't realize like how large it actually is. Um, but again, that doesn't mean that things are bad. I mean, like one of the things that you've also talked to too is like you wrote this book during the pandemic. We come out of the pandemic. What and over the last decade, what's giving you hope then about the current food system that you think you've seen improvement, or where's it going in a good way?
Um, I appreciate that startup founders are finding problems in the food world or future problems. I think one of the misses is that they're looking at future problems. So potentially this might happen, and then they come up with their solution, but they're so focused sort of, vertically in a silo that they're not thinking horizontally across the landscape of food. Um, a colleague of mine was just in India, meeting all these different cultured meat people. And I mean, the cold chain isn't going to support cultured meat in India. She said it was rare to see a fridge or a freezer in a supermarket, and they're all tiny little bodega supermarkets, itsy bitsy, that maybe doesn't even have a refrigerator, or it gets unplugged, or the power goes out, or maybe that one fridge case is owned by a company so it only has their brand in it, right?
Mm,
So if you don't think about how the complexity of the food system and you just look at some future problem, like let's just say, not lab made chocolate, or analog chocolate analogs, right, that aren't solving a problem we have this second. Cacao is expensive, but we're still growing it. We still have it. We can still produce chocolate. But like, can they scale? Can they produce enough, you know, analog chocolate for like a Snickers or an M&Ms? And will those companies accept it? I used to sort of struggle against big food working with food tech and startups, and now I see that they need to help each other.
absolutely. Like conventional, like incumbents, big food, whatever you want to call it, they have figured out things that no one else wants to reinvent. Like they've perfected distribution chains.
Yeah.
Um, they have figured out cold chain management. Like how do you get food refrigerated from one point A to point B efficiently? I remember when Cargill was one of the largest meat processing companies in the world, as an investor in Upside Foods, and I remember talking to their executives, and when they were so wonderful, they were such great people. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that their divisions were broken up and the meat division was called the meat and salt division. And I thought that was so interesting. So I asked,
That's
why is meat and
crazy.
salt? And they said, because the distribution channel, we figured out about 50 years ago, the distribution channels for meat and salt are exactly the same for road salts and consumable salt. So we just put them
Wow.
in the same division. And I was like, that's something we would never have figured out if
Ever.
we'd done this
Yeah.
on our own.
Yeah.
So I agree. I think that also that it also continues to create one of the largest barriers to entry too, right? Because a lot of the systems in place to benefit food production benefit medium to large producers. It's very hard to be a small food producer as a startup and actually make a dent when the purchasing power of again, like a Cargill or a Tyson or a PepsiCo is 1,000 times at least what you could do. Um, so,
Yeah, and our food system is like legacy, right? We saw that in the early days of the pandemic when we started running out of, really key things. We've got these like legacy institutions, right? That big food has grown up around, right? So they have it figured out, but like maybe they're still faxing orders, right? Like they're just
mm,
like they've got like a kludgy system probably that like just keeps our food system rolling along and how's a startup supposed to figure that out? Like they're just not going to do it. So it's like they have to be like big food. But I want these startups to be like everybody should be working to make big food better for us.
mm.
And that goes back to that spokes and like how many things need to affect our change, right? So it's maybe it's big food in the center, and then it's like startups pushing on it, it's government pushing on it, it's media, it's journalists, it's academics and scientists, and we're all like, okay, guys, we're gonna make you better. And so that is what I want to see, and that's what keeps me excited because I think we'll get there. We just need, we have like a new wave of food tech coming, and then it's
Mm.
like the new generations coming in, and I'm excited that I get to kind of watch it happen.
Well, so that also goes to a point I wanted to ask you. Like in your years of reporting, again, what have you learned about the food production that you wish more folks knew? Like just the average consumer. Like you really think deeply about the food system. So, what issues rise to the top that you're just like, I wish more people knew this is how the food system works.
Well, I mean, I think my example of like soy protein isolate, it's like how many times do I have to explain what happens to the single ingredient for people to get it? They don't. Fiber, like everyone needs to be eating fiber. Like it's like we have the simple message, right? Eat mostly plants, not too much. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants, right? You have to eat whole foods and then bring in the junk. Like 20% of your life you can eat donuts and chips and candy, but not 80% of the time. And how things are produced and what goes into an ingredient. Like, I don't know, even if it's just turn the box over and read the back of the label. I want people to want to do that and to understand that they have the information in their hand, right? Turn it over, read the nutrition facts, and then is there something you don't know? Look it up. And to me, that's what I want people to know about our food system is that they have the information. It's just they need to spend more time thinking about it.
And if they just practically, because I agree, but if they don't have time or they're just, they got a family, they got kids nagging them while they're in the grocery store, they just got to get home or they're working two jobs. Like, what's the what's the next best thing if they don't have time to really do that?
Well,
Or
yeah,
would
I
you
mean,
say like you should make the time? I don't know.
no, I
On
know
the
that everyone like I don't have kids, right? So I already have, it easy, quote unquote easy. So, and I have more money to spend on more expensive food or the time sometimes to go to the farmer's market. But most people don't. And it is why we don't see change fast. It's because people go to the market and they buy their same thing every time. That's
mm,
why nothing changes, or it takes a very long time for change. I tell people to put something new in their basket every week. And
mm,
so like that's easy. Just put one thing new in your cart or and I would say like make it a whole food, right? You don't buy red bell peppers, put a red bell pepper. You don't usually buy oranges, put an orange. Everyone buys bananas, buy a different fruit. So it's like, and you don't have to do much to fruit, right? You can just eat it. You don't have to prepare it. You can just eat it. So I think that if they don't have a lot of time, it's to still, shop the outer perimeter of the market, and it's to look at the back of the package, and like fewer ingredients the better, right? I can't assure them that it won't be ultra processed, but the fewer ingredients has got to be better.
Hmm. Unless it's honey, in which case it's high fructose corn syrup, and
Yeah,
you won't
right. They
know.
won't
Um,
know. They won't know.
um, well, again, so speaking of this, I think that's really good advice around the putting the additional ingredient. Speaking of this sort of like newness, like what food companies, products, ingredients, whatever policies even don't exist, and you just can't believe it. Like you just can't believe it. It'd be such a boon if it did. It's so obvious to you from your vantage point, but you're like, I can't believe this doesn't exist, and it should.
Um, we talked about that what consumers want, right? They want it convenient, they want it cheap, they want it tasty. And so I think companies are thinking of single items versus like what I eat in a day, and that day aggregate is what keeps me moving along. It isn't the protein I eat in a single meal, it's the protein I eat throughout the day. um, Schools have only approved soy milk as a milk that can be served in schools because it has all the amino acids that we're supposed to
Mhm.
need. But kids aren't just drinking soy milk, right? They're eating a lot of things throughout the day, so they're going to get other amino acids. They're going to get macronutrients and micronutrients from everything they eat in a day. And so that this sort of um, like this, I think, why don't we have foods that make it simple for us to get everything we need? So is it the macronutrients? Is it the vitamins? Is it, that it has everything in it that we might need to have lunch, right? So it's like the 4 things I might need to have lunch. And so, it's like instead of a Lunchable, it's like it's an apple, it's whole grain crackers, it's carrot sticks, and it's, some kind of protein. So there could be healthy snackables that were actually good for us, and it doesn't exist. Why not?
Well, I'll take it you're not a huge fan of Soylent and Huel. Because those have, I mean, at least initially they claimed, I know that FDA forced
Also
them
not
not
athletic
to.
greens. Also, that's also on
Uh,
my bad list.
oh, Athletic Greens too. I did not know that.
Mhm.
So, but like what they're attempting is, in my opinion, is noble. I don't really drink these because like, but I think that people have attempted for years to sort of create these sort of like omnipotent foods, um, and sort of that give you everything you need. But they've, in large case, like I think every generation has tried this, hasn't really worked. I mean, like the closest I can think of that's still around is pemmican, in North American survival food. But we don't see this, but we see every generation trying to attempt to create this. But why do you think that's not taken off? Is it just because again, it can be construed as ultra processed? It's not like
People
sensory
wanna
satisfying.
eat. Yeah, people wanna eat. Like, I don't do a lot of smoothies or protein powders because I'd rather just find a way to eat it in food, right? So I know I should have protein before I, like, have a hard workout, so I might have nuts and a piece of cheese, or I might have a hard-boiled egg. But, I could have a protein smoothie. If we're talking about Huel or Soylent or Athletic Greens, which is my cause of the moment, they tell us that just, put this powder, this magical green powder in a glass and put water in it and drink it, and that your body's gonna get everything it needs. My body's gonna pee out the primary, like, amount of that drink, and it's not gonna, like, go into my cell walls and, like, keep me healthy. I have friends that say that they really like drinking it. Okay, you like drinking it and it makes you feel good, then that there is something for that, right? The emotional well-being of something that you get from food. I don't wanna deny that, and if you feel good about drinking a
Mhm.
green, liquid, then great, but it isn't gonna be there for your body when it needs it. You're gonna pee most of it out, some of it's gonna be retained, and we don't know what. Like, well, who knows what's retained? You're
Well, what you're
still gonna
deficient in.
or what, yeah,
Usually
right.
it's
I
what
don't
usually it's what you're deficient in.
Yeah, right. So, right, if I'm like, maybe it's potassium or
Mhm.
iodine or magnesium, I don't know. But you're always going to get the biggest bang for your buck eating it from food, not from a powder that's in a glass.
It almost strikes me as you're describing effectively a powdered multivitamin. Which in to an extent, I mean, again, people take them for very valid health reasons, but like, you're peeing out most of what's in a multivitamin. Most people are not super deficient in um most things except for vitamin D. I think they've even stopped. Most people don't even test for vitamin D because we just know everyone's going to be deficient.
Yeah, I mean,
Um
when I've read up on supplements, 'cause it's just such a hard topic to like research
mhm,
and decide and figure out. It's like single vitamins are the best form for us if you're gonna take something. I do take a vitamin D. I do take a statin because I have type 1 diabetes, and chances are good that my cardiovascular system is what will give out at some point because it's a little harder on my organs to have diabetes. So my doctor urges me to take a statin. So I do. But and then I take biotin because I have weak nails. And that's it. That's all I take. I no longer take omegas. I used to take an omega from algae. And now I just make sure that I eat, tinned
mm,
fish to get omegas because I know I
mm.
would rather get the nutrients from food than from a supplement, which we are almost never guaranteed we are going to retain. And that Athletic Greens is doing such a crazy good job at convincing people that they're going to do it all in one fell swoop, right? Th- I don't know. It's just
Do
marketing
you think you've
versus
learned
reality.
Larissa, do you feel like you've learned a lot of this as a result of like your career journey so far, like in journalism? Or is this just something you would have picked up anyway because you're interested in it because of your health condition, what have you? Is it both? Where do you think a lot of this knowledge decided to plop itself in your brain?
I definitely from the job.
Mm,
I as a journalist, I love I mentioned this, I love researching new things and I love learning as much as I can. I love talking to experts. I think that if you were going to ask me like one thing, it's like just learning something from new people. And I love talking to people that are passionate in this like, niche whatever area of the world. And I think that has made me a better person with diabetes than I would have been if I did not was not a journalist. So I am better managing my diabetes because of learning
mm.
about food through journalism.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about something you also it's related but somewhat askew, but growing or waning interest in venture dollars when it comes to food technology, and why is it waning?
Oh,
If I may ask a leading question.
yeah. I
Mm,
mean, companies are having a hard, hard, hard time right now. I I was surprised. I recently went to a CPG event, startup CPG event, and CPG is consumer packaged goods, and it's all that crunchy, snacky candy, cookies, whatever, chips. It's all the savory, salty stuff that we love to eat and that isn't always good for us. But I love the CPG world and I love seeing new products. I love going to markets. And everybody there was saying how hard it was to raise new funds. And you look at the areas that are having an easy time when it might be like the liquid death area, right? Liquid death it's just canned water and they've raised just tons. But Spindrift just sold and not for as much as you might have thought. Um, the bar that's being talked about right now is the David bar, which came from the RX bar founder, and that it has everybody's interest. I think the bar is terrible and it's definitely ultra processed. So it's like, and I don't know if David has venture, but because it's RX and it's also packaged in gold, so it looks like, kind of the Willy Wonka gold chocolate bar. Venture funding is very low right now in the food world, and I think people are just not certain about where things are going, especially with the new, political group taking over. Things are, kind of TBD. I am working on a story about the blueberry world and the berry world because this is an area that is getting a ton of venture funding. And why is that? Berries are premium. People are willing to buy them week after week. They're 100% healthy, and there's nothing you can say bad about them.
The North American berry, the blueberry, basically invented by USDA, at least the modern version that you can harvest standing up rather than squatting down. My favorite
Right.
blueberry fact. Subscribe for more blueberry facts. Um, the I think it's one of the things is we saw the Biden administration put in the bioeconomy infrastructure recommendation to invest in sort of things like cultivated meat, alternative proteins, but like the biomanufacturing, and at the same time watched investments just start to just fall off a cliff, and that was interesting to me as someone who works in this world, watching investment at a federal level, which is what we wanted and want to have, and venture dollars drying up. Usually, what that means is venture dollars maybe don't write as large a checks when government buys in because they want the government to support this financially. But they're still investing, and I see, and then added to the RFK issue and uncertainty that we have there, I'm seeing also the same thing. But I'm curious. I don't know if you were seeing this before the administration change as well, because that's what I was seeing. But
Oh, yeah, I was seeing it before, for sure. It's not like a Trump thing. It's been waning probably as ultra processed food conversation came up in the media. I'd say, VC went down because too many people are, thinking it's just not viable. And then also just the amount of money needed to get something off the ground, right? If we could just look at you two, Eat Just and Upside Foods, right? The two kind of longest running, oldest cultured meat companies. And they're still like, I don't know, Upside Foods is having an infrequent kind of pop up somewhere, and that's it. So it's just, I don't think, I think investors are like, "It's okay, I plenty of runway, they can have as long as they want," but at some point, it's not gonna work, and, it's also exciting, Mosa Meat just applied for EU regulatory approval, so that is interesting, and maybe a different country, a different company, a different startup can can
mm,
can figure it out. I have a lot of doubt that this is the right time for something like that.
mm, yeah, it's something that definitely going to keep an eye on, because I think this now is the time for more investment, because these companies have figured out how they need to scale, and scaling costs money. That I think it's when venture realized how much it costs to actually compete at scale for food. Like, food is just so much more. It's so much larger than anything else, and you can develop code and AI, whatever, for a fraction of that and see large returns potentially. Spread your bets a lot more evenly too.
But well,
But
AI certainly gave an opportunity for VCs to be like, "Oh, wait, this is a better category for us to invest in." And then, we just have to point to this new Chinese company that came out with
DeepSeek
AI,
wiped
right?
out
With
$1 trillion
for
in,
$5 million, they've like, kind of come up with a competitor. So things are happening faster. Things are happening, like old culture meat took, $100 million or more, and maybe new culture meat is going to do it for less because the old culture meat is going to inform new culture meat. And
hmm
so,
hmm
but then we want to see the Cargills and the Tysons, like let them take it on, so that they can support it, right, with their deep pockets and their know-how.
That's right. Yeah, agreed. My last and favorite question. What what are your pet peeve hot take food myths that you just want to put to bed? People listening, just like pet issues that you just want to clear up once and for all around food, that you're just tired of having to sort of tell people individually, if you
I
have
think,
one.
yeah, I think it's like people wanna be suspicious about their food or about new foods, like, I'm still sort of dispelling the GMO
Mhm.
topic. right? Like, I don't want to dispel that anymore because they're already like, hey, you're already eating that genetically modified ingredients. Like, just move on, right? You're still standing, you're still okay. You want to be upset about Roundup, be upset about Roundup, but don't be upset about genetically modified soy because it's in everything. And so it's like people being suspicious about their food says to me that they're willing to know a little bit, but not enough. And if you have time to know a little bit, then you have time to know more. So, like, do more research if you want to be suspicious about your food. Really tired about telling people that tofu doesn't have estrogen in it and they should be worried about eating tofu. And that's an old myth that still lives to this day. That would be nice to be dispelled because tofu is so healthy and good for you. And, you're not going to eat it 7 days a week. Don't eat anything 7 days a week.
I think it's the tofu estrogen myth is the first cousin to MSG is bad for you myth. Um,
Yes.
as well. Like it found a toehold in society and it just ran with it for 40 years.
Yep.
Um,
Mm.
um, but yeah, so okay. Larissa, you clearly are not one to rest on your laurels. Like, what's next? What are you doing? Where can people get a hold of you? What book are you writing now?
Yeah.
I'm so curious. You're always got something cooking that we should be aware of.
Yeah. I have a biweekly Substack. It's called Technically Food, and you can subscribe, and I would love you to do that. I am writing for publications, which is always sometimes hard and sometimes great. And I'm working on my next book. You guessed it. And maybe we came up with the name in our talk, Skeptically Food. I am still working on the name, but I really do like that. And it will be about the dilemmas that we have with food. So there will be a chapter on ultra processed food, but there might also be a chapter on seed oils, which we didn't talk about, but is just one of those like naughty subjects that is like just confusing people. Like, can I have seed oils? Oh, they're bad. Oh, they're bad. Okay, they're bad. Wait, they're not bad. It's just ah, so coming up the future wars dilemma, like what are we worrying about? What are we worrying about in the next 10 years? And what do we need sort of a better understanding of? And what are your hot topics that you can't really decide on? That's the next book I'm writing.
Amazing. You should definitely come back to talk about seed oils. That one's going to, I think, just that might be the most interesting topic. I still think that next to is coffee bad for you. I think I want to put that to bed at some point.
Oh
TLDR,
yeah.
it's great for you. It's probably the only source of antioxidants most humans get during the day, unless you're eating fruit regularly. Um,
I love
but
coffee, but I also gotta say that I've had some really good, like, coffee analogs. There's one by Minus Coffee that's fantastic. I just got one called Madcast Coffee that's like and it's like all these, like oh, they're great. Barley, like, all these, like, interesting things that I might never eat. So, yeah,
yeah,
check out
uh,
alternatives.
of course, you are always a fascinating person to talk to. Larissa Zimberoff, thank
You
you so
too.
much for being on here. And we will thank you again for listening and check the show notes for additional information on how to contact Larissa.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me here.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend? And don't forget to give us a 5-star review. You'll find more content like this on thespoon.tech/podcasts.